Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and look, more Lancer content. We're going to be covering some of the additional frames that were released with the new Winter Scar adventure path that they put out, Operation. There you go. Operation that they put out. And I definitely got to say, so today, obviously, we're looking at the Lycan, which is a variant frame of the Manticore. And I gotta say, I really wish they just did this upper part of the page different. The upper part of this frame, like, he looks so small on this page. They just had to squish this text up, shrink it down a little bit, and just make this picture a bit bigger. And this would be way better to look at. But right now, he just looks absolutely tiny, or they just look absolutely tiny. So, the Lycan. We all know the Manticore at this point, castigating the enemies of the Godhead and all that. But the Lycan is very different. And in fact, it's not so based on suicide tactics, and as much it's based on being an absolute unit on the battlefield. And then when things start getting hard, you get harder. That's essentially what the Lycan is. I actually really do like this frame. I love the design for it, and I would have liked to see like a whole version of the Lycan with all of its armor on. Like, I guess you could like cut it down the middle and mirror the image, I guess. But regardless, it's a really interesting frame. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the stats, and you can decide whether you want to add this to your repertoire of mech frames or not. All right, starting out here, we can see stats very similar to the Manticore. In fact, the only differences between the Lycan and the Manticore is its heat capacity, which is a little worse, and its sensors, which is a little worse. But for those of you who might not be familiar with the Manticore, 2 armor and 8 HP makes for an incredibly tanky mech. Just a small investment in some hull will make this mech incredibly hard to burst down, more or less. And 2 armor means it has decent medium, or not medium, main weapon protection. So pretty solid. It still gets punished heavily by heavy and super heavy enemy types and weapons, but for anything smaller than that, this mech is going to be very sturdy against those kind of mechs. Also has a really good E defense, though with many of the tankier mechs, its evasion is pretty low, being on the broadside of a barn level of low. So you're going to get hit. That's kind of honestly the point with this frame. And the heat capacity is still not terrible, being on the upper end of the average heat capacity of frames. So honestly, the small drop, the 1-point drop from the Manticore, not too big a deal, honestly. And this frame, I don't think in particular is going to be that much into investing a lot into its engineering, to be honest. Its sensor range is dropped. It's now in the medium long range, which is not a big deal, honestly. A 2 hex difference is not going to make or break the frame. If anything, it just makes it a little bit worse at hacking, which, to be fair, it does give a +1 tech attack bonus, or it has a +1 tech. So that's honestly pretty good. Its repair capacity is the same, but it's still very low. So despite being a very aggressive frame, it is very vulnerable to not doing well in longer missions, especially considering some of its core system specifically, which we're going to talk about. So again, investing in hull is only going to be your best friend here. Its save target is average, but still pretty good. Its speed is pretty slow, but pretty average, honestly, considering it's a heavier frame. Despite being a size 1, the 2 armor makes it like pretty tanky, so that's actually pretty normal. And its system points matches the Manticore, being just below the average, though many frames have 6 points. Again, it's mean versus average, I don't know. It's not a big deal, and honestly, this particular frame doesn't need a whole lot really to make it work really well. So having a very small amount of system points isn't really a big deal. Like, legitimately, honestly, investing in hull is really the only thing I can see maybe increasing your agility a little bit just to have the increased speed so that you can get in position better. Those two things are the biggest things I feel like you want to invest in when it comes to the Lycan. But if we move down and look at the frame traits here, we can see that we have Slag Carapace, which is the same as the Manticore, making us resistant to energy damage, and Burn, which there are some area energy damage weapons. So our allies can blast us to their heart's content. We're going to be pretty good. Resistance on top of our armor, as long as it's not armor piercing, which to be fair, many energy weapons tend to be, we can be generally fine. Same with Burn, funny enough. Now, the interference field is the major departure from the Manticore, and now you can see here, rather than just kind of being a ticking time bomb waiting to just go off and vaporize everyone around us as we go out in holy fire, this frame particularly is designed to get up close and personal with the enemies and then just be a pain in the ass. So the interference field is honestly what a lot of people have been wanting in strategy RPG games that we just haven't been getting lately. It's effectively a taunt, and one that we don't use an action to activate, but is just a general effect of the character. Now, it's not a full taunt, but this does make it where we don't have to use any kind of action economy to activate it, and just being up close to the enemy is interfering with them, which I think is really good. So what it does, I guess I should say, if anyone is just listening, for instance, is any enemies within range 3 of the Lycan take +1 difficulty on all attacks that do not target the Lycan. So the Lycan is really good at getting close to the enemies, and the enemies either have to move away, which to be fair, they typically can do so pretty easy. Though, if your Lycan is grappling enemies, so you might want to consider looking into the Blackbeard for the Blackbeard license, I should say, to get some methods of keeping the enemy kind of locked in place, or even the Black Witch, honestly. There's some good stuff there. As long as the enemies can't easily get away, they're going to suffer a +1 difficulty on all attacks they make against a target that isn't the Lycan. So as long as they're within 3 of the Lycan, they can't benefit from, or they get a +1 difficulty for their attacks. So the Lycan wants to lock people down. It wants to move into positions the enemies don't want it to be in. And since it's not penalized to attack, it makes it a much more viable target. Granted, again, this has some easy counterplay as long as the enemy can move away. Most enemies can move at least 3 hexes, and thus any enemy typically can get out of the range as long as they have the ability to move. So interference field, while I do like the idea behind it, I feel like the general practice, if it was like range 5, I would say, even though that's a massive range on the battlefield, in all honesty, range 5 would at least make it where super slow enemies would struggle to get out of the zone. And 5 speed is not very common, at least in lower levels of play. I know there's some upper level enemies that definitely can get like some speed boosts for sure. But this is a really good ability. I still like it, even though it has some really easy counterplay, especially because there's just a lot you can do on your turn to make sure that the enemies don't get away. And the last trait we have here is Power Flux. So once per round, whenever the Lycan takes heat, a hostile character within range 3 must pass a system save or become impaired and slowed until the end of their next turn. So this is one of the few reasons why putting some points into your engineering might be good with the Lycan, because then you can take more heat, which can make more enemies essentially impaired or slowed as long as they're failing their system saves, which, you know, considering this is a Horus mech, that's not going to be difficult considering all the boosts you can get to your saves being in the Horus line through their core bonuses. So this is a really good mech. It's tanky. It gets up close and personal, and enemies that ignore it are going to suffer, and enemies that have to move away from it will probably be out of position, making it really good at disruption. So it's really solid. The biggest things I would take with the Lycan moving forward is look for core bonuses that increase your armor, increase your size. That would be really, really good. And more importantly, talents and such that make it easier for you to grapple enemies, so that if the Lycan is grappling an enemy, they have really no choice but to shoot the Lycan, or they're just going to suffer even more. So taking a look here at the weapon mounts, we don't have a lot of weapon mounts. Now, that's actually not a big deal. Usually I complain about this aspect because I just like guns on my mechs. I just want my mechs to have guns, but this is actually not a very big problem. And we have a heavy mount and a flex mount, which I'm glad it's not a main mount. I hate main mounts. I think they're the worst. Flex mount just works typically much better. So a heavy mount and a flex mount, honestly, not a bad combination. But one of the biggest reasons why I'm not too particularly upset about this is the core system. So its core system, Subversive's signature, has an active that is Go Loud. No passive effects, even though you see core integrated equipment here. Unlike many other frames in the game, this core integrated equipment is only specific to when it uses its active power. But this is actually a really easy active power to utilize, and honestly, it's something that I really appreciate the overall design principles behind this, because it rewards patience. It's not something you want to use immediately. And because it's efficient, which you can see at the very bottom here, you can see it's an efficient system. That means that even though you're very prone to want to just activate the system right away, you actually want to wait. So Go Loud, what's it do? It's a full action, but I will say this is technically a combination full action barrage action. So you jettison your armor, making your armor become 0. So it says becomes 0, not is -2 or whatever base. Whatever armor you have, if you add armor or whatever, it all gets dropped to 0. But your speed does become 6. The base speed 6 is huge. Your mech is incredibly fast and can get wherever it needs to go. Though you do lose slag, carapace, and interference field, which means that in order to go loud, you have to give up a lot of what makes your mech the mech, but in exchange, you gain the Shock Claws integrated super heavy weapon. Yes, we have an integrated super heavy weapon. And unlike a lot of other super heavy weapons, this one's honestly not a big pain in the ass to use. Many super heavy weapons are incredibly powerful, but in exchange for that, they have a lot of prerequisites, or they require that you use them as at the beginning of your turn before anything else, that kind of stuff. This one, not so much the case. You just have to sacrifice half your frame traits and as well all your armor to utilize it. Now, the Shock Claws at base are pretty good. You can see here that they're a threat 1, 3d6 plus 6 super heavy damage, which is pretty good. Not on the upper end of super heavy weapons for sure, especially for melee weapons, but not a bad amount of damage for sure. It has armor piercing, and it's accurate, and it has overkill, which means it's going to hurt. It's going to cut through enemy armor like butter. It's very easy for it to land its strike, and as well, overkill just ensures it's going to do a good amount of damage. It's a very damage efficient mech. And again, this overkill is another reason why you might want to invest in a little bit of engineering to get your heat cap up. But there are better ways to get your heat cap up that you don't necessarily need to do that. Now, it also has some additional features. So this effect may only be used when you're going loud. So again, you can't use this integrated weapon until you go loud. And 2, you may deal a d6 armor piercing energy damage to a different character of your choice within range 3 of the target. Now, it does say to a different character of your choice. So there might be ways you can utilize this on an ally or maybe even yourself, I don't know, to have an extra benefit. But the biggest thing is you can consider this as it has an arcing strike from the Shock Claws, essentially, that damages an additional enemy. So this weapon technically does 3d6 plus 6 plus 1d6 to an additional target. So a very powerful weapon, but it actually gets better than this. And also, I guess, it's a super heavy weapon, but I guess I'll make mention of this as well. It says this weapon cannot be used to attack in the same turn as another heavy or super heavy weapon. So, pretty standard for super heavy weapons, though I think the heavy part is different. doesn't really make a big difference. Essentially, you can only use this weapon essentially once, unless you have like a main or a smaller weapon in addition, I suppose. But there's an additional part to this. You can see it has additional weapon tabs here, which expand what it does depending on when you activate it. So it says before activation, this weapon's output can be enhanced by proximity to extreme structural damage. Now, this is only extreme structural damage in consideration for yourself or your allies. So if an ally takes structure damage within your sensor range during this time, it goes up. And if that happens a second time, it goes up again from damage to ruined. Also, if you activate this core power when you are at 2 structure or less, you automatically gain the full range. So at damaged, you gain an additional threat. There's nothing else that gets added here. And at ruins, it increases the damage by a d6. So this particular weapon is particularly good when you wait during the combat for structure damage to happen. Now, it's either when an ally gets structured or you get down to structure 2, not if you get down to 1, like structure 3, because like getting down 1 structure does not bring you to the damage level. You have to be either at structure 2 or less, or you need to have an ally within sensor range take structure damage from a hostile source as well. I guess I didn't mention that as well. So this weapon in particular is really good. And honestly, even if you don't wait, it's a pretty solid choice. Though then you're just choosing instead to play more of like a berserker high damage build rather than a juggernaut tank build, because you're sacrificing your armor to gain speed and a pretty decent super heavy weapon that, while it doesn't do the most damage, is still going to hurt a lot and can let you rip through many minor enemy forces, though I wouldn't use this against some heavier elite enemy forces. So that is the Lycan. It is very good, I would say, personally. I like its overall design principles. I think it's a very fun way to play the game. I love dynamic playstyles. I like playstyles that change over the course of a battlefield depending on what happens in the battle. And this is exactly what you want. And because it's a defender striker frame, there are a multitude of ways you can play the Lycan. You can play the Lycan as a pure defender, get big, get bulky, get in enemies' ways, use your interference field, do all kinds of stuff like that, get systems that lock enemies down, prevent movement, all kinds of stuff like that. Or you could play as a berserk striker frame, just get tons of hull, utilize your speed and your super heavy weapon, add all kinds of different systems that give you additional damage bonuses, and then just go to town and rip through the enemies. There's really no bad way to play the Lycan in that respect, which I think is really good. It can even be a hacker tank if you really want it to. All it does is gets into the middle of the enemies and then just starts using its hacking abilities. So this makes it a really good alternate frame for any other, probably Horus mechs you have, but there's a lot of other good hacker frames out there as well. So I think the Lycan is pretty good. I would like to see some builds around the Lycan. I think it's really, really cool and very interesting. But that's going to be it for the video. We have 2 more frames to cover. We have the, let's see here. We have the Kutuzov frame from the Napoleon. And we have the Amber Phantom frame from the Metal Mark. I'll probably cover Amber Phantom frame next. And also, I have not forgotten as well, we have not done the, I think we haven't done, there's a frame we haven't done yet. So we haven't done the Zhang yet, and we haven't done the Emperor, which for some reason, I was doing them in order on this list, and I don't know if I skipped Emperor or something, but we haven't done Emperor, and we haven't done the Zhang yet either. So both of those frames will be covered in some future videos, but since we have some new content out, I definitely wanted to go over and cover them. So, and they're going to be shorter videos as they're not like whole license reviews. So yeah, let me know. Actually, are there any frames of the new ones you want me to cover first? Whether it's the Amber Phantom or it's the Kutuzov, or do you want me to actually do like the full licenses I haven't done before? My community for Lancer players are not particularly big, so I'll listen to what you guys say. Honestly, it really doesn't bother me either way. I like many of the frames in the game, and talking about anything really helps. There's also a new book coming out. Actually, that reminds me, if you haven't done so already, like this video. In fact, go out, find some other Lancer videos, like those videos as well. The more people who like Lancer content, the more Lancer content we're going to see, or at the very least, the more Lancer content other people get to see, as hopefully the algorithm likes that. So that would be really nice. I'd like to see more Lancer content on the internet, honestly. And if you like my content specifically, or if you want to see stuff on like the new book that's coming out, I don't cover them necessarily if I have something else conflicting, but typically when new stuff comes out, I try to get it out to y'all as quickly as possible. So if you want that, subscribe to the channel. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.